The legendary release of ELO's Out of the Blue was followed by a series of albums that stripped down the classical stylings the band was known for. Disco was all the rage in the late 70s, and its sound began to seep its way into rock and roll. Discovery and the soundtrack to Xanadu plunged headfirst into the craze. The following wave of anti-disco fervor and poor reception of Xanadu put a bit of a damper on their fame, but they were still a commercial success. It would be 1981's Time that changed everything for ELO, their sound, their direction, and their legacy. Musicians like the Flaming Lips, Steve Winwood, The Apples in Stereo, and Daft Punk have all cited the album as an inspiration to their own work. But one of the lesser-known impacts this album had was its inclusion in the opening animation for Daicon 4. If you're not familiar, this 6-minute short film was a key stepping stone to the foundation of Studio Gainax. If you're still not familiar, they're the ones who made Neon Genesis Evangelion. Time is already one of my favorite albums, if not my favorite album period. To learn that it played a part in the history of one of my favorite anime was mind-blowing, and I think it's a story that deserves to be told. I'll be covering the opening tracks, Prologue and Twilight, but I highly recommend listening to the rest of it. The same sentiment applies to Daicon 4 and Evangelion, both worth a watch when you're done. Let's get into it. While ELO started to lose its strings in the late 70s, it was here that the switch to synth was made complete. Jeff Lynne, the band's leader, wanted an electronic sound to evoke images of the future. Time was their second concept album after El Dorado, telling the story of a man who wakes up in the year 2095. The music captures his fear, confusion, and sorrow, being in such a strange place, wondering if he'll ever make it back home. The album is opened by Prologue, which leads directly into Twilight. As our protagonist lays down to sleep, he approaches the barrier between all he knows and all he does not. And as he treads the halls of sanity, a voice speaks.
I have a message from another time.
Bev Bevan's drums echo through a synthetic soundscape before Lynn's vocals make their way to the forefront. At first, it feels like they push against the synth, like a hand through a waterfall, before the synth surrounds it, flows in harmony. One of Time's mysteries is whether or not the events that the protagonist experiences are real or a dream. The album's opening sees him transported through dimensions of time as his consciousness fades, leaving it ambiguous. Even Lynn doesn't know, explaining in an interview, "It's baffled me since I wrote it. I'd rather not say because I don't know either." Arriving in a strange world, he gets a glimpse of whatever force brought him, but just as soon as it appears, it vanishes. Everything's changed, and he already wishes he was home. The dramatic change of pitch and pace is incredible, but it's pretty par for the course with ELO, especially at this point in their career. There's a constant back and forth between Lynn, Bevan, the piano, and the synth, each taking the spotlight with no break between them. Despite the roaring start, it ends softly, Lynn's voice fading and playing in the background until it's almost unrecognizable, as beeps and boops lead us into the next track. At the time, though still a commercial success, the reviews were mixed. The hard lean into synth pop turned away some critics and longtime fans, who saw it as too distinct from their previous work. A final world tour was staged to accompany the album, but saw meager crowds and ticket sales compared to their previous showings. While not a failure, it wasn't the hit they needed to bounce back from Xanadu, leading to the band's breakup after their next release. From 1962 onwards, an annual convention titled the Nihon SF Taikai has been held in Japan, dedicated to science fiction. The location changes from year to year, and nicknames are given to each event depending on where it's hosted. If it's in Tokyo, it's Tokon. If it's in Nagoya, it's Meikon. And if it's in Osaka, it's Daicon. The first Daicon was in 1964, the second in 71, the third in 81, and the fourth in 83. For the latter two, an amateur group of animators came together to produce short films that were shown at each convention. Daicon 3 opening animation is a pretty long title, so for this section, I'll refer to them as D3 and D4. Each convention was traditionally hosted by local university students, and 3 such students, Hideaki Anno, Hiroyuki Yamaga, and Takami Akai, were tasked by organizers with producing the D3 animation. Inexperience and a lack of budget were big obstacles, so they had to find clever workarounds. Anno was unfamiliar with animation cells, and went to professional studios to learn from the best. In order to procure materials, they bought a single cell from a hobby store and brought it directly to a vinyl manufacturer to make copies. The work was done in the house of Toshio Okada, one of the convention organizers. Okada produced the film, and Yamaga directed it. Akai focused more on character animation, while Anno worked on the mecha. Others came and went to trace or paint cells, but the majority of work was done by these 4. Daicon 3 came and went, and that was supposed to be the end of it. But the team that had formed around the project had grown close, and valued the work they had put into it. Dubbing themselves Daicon Film, they started planning another convention in Osaka, and making an even more ambitious animation to follow up D3. To fund this project, they began selling copies and merchandise of D3,
500 cigarettes,
as well as producing more short films in the intervening period. When Daicon 4 rolled around, the production crew had expanded to 12 people. Yamaga was back in the director's seat, with Akai and Anno bumped up to animation directors. There's a lot of crew and collaborators, so I'll list them out on screen. Some of them were industry professionals, sourced from production company Artland. They worked in an actual studio this time, called the Hosei Kaikan. Yasuhiro Takeda, one of the organizers, described the studio as a literal sweatshop, as animators worked through the night with no air conditioning. But years of love, sweat, and dedication gave way to Daicon 4's opening animation. Both films feature a brown-haired girl who interacts with a variety of characters from Japanese and American pop culture. Godzilla, Darth Vader, an Xenomorph, Dino Robo, Batman, Spider-Man, and tons of various mecha and spaceships. D3 follows our protagonist as a little girl, given a glass of water by the Science Patrol from Ultraman, and instructed to deliver it to Daicon. On her way, she is attacked by various mecha and kaiju, who she fights off with her super strength and backpack missile launcher. It also turns into a jetpack. How practical. After destroying a fleet of ships, she pours the water onto a Daicon, another name for a winter radish. It transforms into a radish-shaped spaceship, which she boards as the pilot. Okada and Takada pilot the ship into space, where it blasts off. D4 starts with a recap of D3, before we watch the radish ship pass over the screen, as the lyrics to Prologue appear overhead. Then, as the intro to Twilight begins, we see that our protagonist has grown up, and is wearing a bunny costume. She continues her streak of fighting anyone who crosses her path, grappling and throwing opponents 50 times her size with ease. Suddenly, the sword Stormbringer descends from the skies, and she jumps on top of it like a surfboard, riding it into the heavens. She surfs past a collage of ships and characters, before dismounting, to watch the sword split into 7 brilliant blades. After another gratuitous sci-fi ship barrage, we get the most important part of the film. A city is blown apart by a massive explosion, and as the shock travels outward, the rubble turns to cherry blossoms. Mountains rise and rivers burst forward, as a dead earth is brought to life, with help from the radish ship, firing a beam that splits the clouds. With the flowers symbolizing life, and the explosion evocative of a nuclear attack, it's a powerful image of rebirth in the face of tragedy. We get one last crowd of characters, before zooming out to the cosmos, coming to an end on the logo for Daicon 4. There's also a behind-the-scenes sequence, set to Hold On Tight, another song from Time. The films are an absolute joy to watch, though I'd be lying if I said they're of the same quality. Daicon 3 is a great effort from college animators, but it's pretty choppy and has limited movement. The character design is much simpler and cartoonish, though I liked it having more of a plot. Daicon 4, however, is visually stunning from beginning to end. Rather than simple missile trails and explosions, you feel every step of the action, every impact. As the protagonist soars through the sky, The music rushes ever higher. Its lush instrumentation matched every second by the animation. I'm playing the footage, but you really have to watch it with sound to experience its magic. D3 and D4 were incredibly popular, though official distribution was difficult due to the presence of copyrighted material. A copy was circulated on Laserdisc and is still a highly sought-after item. Nevertheless, Daicon Film had gained a considerable amount of attention from their work. 2 years after Daicon 4, they changed their name to Studio Gainax. Even before the release of D4, Anno and Yamaga were brought to Artland in Tokyo by Studio Nue in recognition of their work on D3. They were given positions as staff for Super Dimension Fortress Macross, which became Anno's first professional work. As Gainax, however, the former students could now produce their own series, starting with Royal Space Force and Gunbuster. While acclaimed, they struggled with funding at times, dabbling in models and video games to keep the studio running. Anno had fallen into a deep depression after finishing Nadia, The Secret of Blue Water. The company was struggling financially, and Akai and Okada had left, putting Gainax in its darkest days. During this period, he befriended Toshimichi Otsuki at King Records, who promised him a time slot for a new series. With a history of drawing giant robots, and inspired by his own struggles with mental health, he developed a project that would put a new spin on the mecha genre. This project was titled Alcyon, but that title was rejected, so he renamed it to Neon Genesis Evangelion. The series features children fighting eldritch beings called angels through the use of giant robots called EVA units. However, more of a focus is put on the thoughts and feelings of the pilots, rather than the battles themselves. How does it feel to have the weight of the world on your shoulders? How do our relationships with others hurt us? And would we be better off alone? The show's production was infamously troubled, with many deadlines nearly missed, a dwindling budget, and already limited staff stretched thin. Anno's depression and subsequent therapy led to an increasing focus on psychology, causing the direction and scope of the project to change midway through. Reportedly, he hadn't yet decided how the anime would end until the production of its final 2 episodes, leading to a very abstract and minimalist finale. This decision led to much backlash, even death threats from fans. But at last, Evangelion's 26-episode run was over. So, with Gainax on its last legs, did Evangelion work? Unless you've been living under a rock, you know the answer. It's one of the most highly praised, world-renowned, influential, and financially lucrative series in anime history. Within 2 years, merchandise sales totaled over $400 million. And nowadays, you can get nearly anything EVA branded. Laptops, buckets, body spray, shaving cream, canned bread. The money was more than enough to save the company, as well as produce 2 films that replaced the original ending, Death and Rebirth and the End of Evangelion. If you clicked on this video, I'm sure you're already well familiar with Evangelion and its vast impact upon the landscape of anime. A deconstruction of mecha ended up redefining it and inspiring decades of incels to discuss which 14-year-old girl they find more attractive. But Evangelion wouldn't have been possible without the success of Studio Gainax, a studio which originally formed as Daicon Film. It's a bit presumptuous to say that D4 couldn't have happened without Twilight. I'm sure there's some universe where they picked another song and became just as successful, but Twilight is a key part of Daicon's DNA, and in Japan, the two are intrinsically linked. For example, the opening of 2005 series Densha Otoko was an homage to Daicon 4, and was once again set to prologue in Twilight. And in any case, I think it's less presumptuous to say that Evangelion would have never happened without Daicon. The moment in D4, where a cityscape is turned to cherry blossoms, was animated by Anno himself, and the detailed image of urban destruction is mimicked in Evangelion. Throughout the series, fluid and widespread devastation is always visually striking, especially in the finale movie, End of Evangelion. Watching an entire planet terraformed in just moments is a haunting twist on the ending of D4, and no less of a joy to watch. Though Gainax itself is gone, its founders moved on to new projects. The world of animation would have never been the same without it. Art is always built on the love an artist has for their influences. Kids that grew up with Gunbuster, Fooly Cooly, Evangelion, and Gurren Lagann go on to make their own series with traces of Gainax DNA. So too were these works built upon a love of science fiction, as evident by the cavalcade of references in each Daicon film. As a shining example of sci-fi itself, I think that Some Part of Time made its way into Anno's own masterpiece. Or maybe it just sounded really cool, I don't know. As always, thank you for watching. I originally watched Daicon 4 and thought it was pretty neat, as a big fan of ELO. But when I saw Anno was attached to the project, my jaw dropped. I had to keep digging, and sure enough, the story got even crazier. I couldn't not make a video on it. If you're a fan of ELO, a fan of anime, or a fan of Evangelion, feel free to leave a comment and let me know what you thought, or drop a suggestion for what I should cover next. Until next time, see ya!